Hey everybody, what's up? I know it's been a while since I last made a video, but I got a lot of practice in with this deck, and I've done really well with it recently. I top 32 two different opens, I won a PPTQ and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I thought I'd try my hand at making some videos and running through a league real fast. But before we start that, I'm gonna give kind of like an updated deck list and explain like some of the card choices and stuff. Um, so I guess I'll just start over here. So the mana base is basically the same. Um, I've added some City of Brass because I like having an untapped land that taps for any color of mana. It's really good for the getting a Pentad Prism down on turn 2 when you really need it. It's also good for the times when you only have two Seeming Spirit Guides left in your deck, and you need to play an untapped land that turn, and then use your other two Spirit Guides to cast Lightning Storm or something. That's happened a few times. I'm really liking it. It's obviously bad versus like really aggressive decks. Like if you have it down on turn 1 and he deals you a bunch of damage over the course of the game, it can put you in a pretty tight spot. But I think it's worth it because usually the game is decided on like turn 4 really with this deck. So you know, however much damage you take isn't really that relevant. Um, this stack here, right here, should be pretty self-explanatory. It's all mana acceleration that we need in order to kill them. The cheapest typical combo we can do costs 6 mana, not including the win con. So there's an additional like at least 3 tacked onto that. But yeah, that's pretty self-explanatory stuff. We got 8 cantrips, the best cantrips we have in Modern right now for this deck, and nothing really much to be said with that. Um, I am trying out a one of Echoing Truth in the main. I cut a Pact Negation for this. This is really just a concession to Meddling Mage because, aside from when you're playing against humans, first off the matchup is awful. Second off, if they name Ad Nauseam with Meddling Mage, you can't kill them unless you draw a Lightning Storm and then you kill the Meddling Mage, which forces you to go off the Laboratory Maniac because we don't have any way of getting this back from the graveyard. And if that's the case, if they're smart, they can just hold up a vial on like 3 or whatever and just Reflector Mage your Laboratory Maniac when you try to kill them. So this is really just a concession of that. It's also just kind of a catch-all, so it hits like mainboard Eidolons if anybody's playing that, and like other mainboard shenanigans, but mostly for Meddling Mage. This deck right here these are the white spells that let you combo off. Each of them have matchups where they're better than the other. So like for example, Phyrexian Life is better against Burn, or is better in the Burn matchup than Angel's Grace is. Namely because it essentially in that matchup it says gain 10 life or gain at least 10 life, and it can't be skull cracked. I mean, Angel's Grace can't be skull cracked either. But you get this down early, and even if they play an Eidolon, you can still kill them with your Ad Nauseam. You have to watch how much poison damage you're taking, but usually you can just kill them with the Ad Nauseam. It's fine. If you're at 2 and you try to Angel's Grace and they have an Eidolon to play, you'll die to the Eidolon trigger because even though Angel's Grace has split second, trigger still happens. So Chalice of the Void and Eidolon are like the two big cards in Modern you really got to watch out for when you're casting this card. Matchups where Angel's Grace are better is like Storm or other combo decks that try to kill you like in one go. Um, so like KCI, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, we'll see where these are better as we play the league. Uh, so this stack are usually the copies of Ad Nauseam, right? So there's obviously the 4 copies of the actual card Ad Nauseam. Um, if you don't know how this combos with these cards, basically, if you play one of these white cards and you cast Ad Nauseam, you can pick up your entire deck. You go to a negative life total, which doesn't really matter because Angel's Grace says you can't lose the game this turn, no matter what your life total is, and Phyrexian Life says you don't lose the game for having 0 or less life, which is pretty convenient. So you pick up your whole deck, and then you cast a Lightning Storm and chuck a bunch of lands at your opponent's face, or you play a Laboratory Maniac followed by a Seer of Visions and win that way. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Another really good use for this card is just casting it for value. I find often that people don't expect it. Like, you just cast Ad Nauseam and you just draw a bunch of cards with it. Like, that's what the card was intended to do. And people kind of get caught off guard when you do that. I particularly like that line of play against decks like Mardu Pyromancer and Jund, when they go on the Liliana the Veil plan to just tear your hand apart. I typically try to play it so that I leave Ad Nauseam as the last card in my hand, and when they tick up Liliana, in response, I'll cast the Ad Nauseam, draw a bunch of cards, and discard like a Lotus Bloom or something that we don't need. But yeah, so I know some people forget that the card actually has other text than I combo and kill you. Yeah. So Spoils of the Vault. This card's really weird. Basically, you choose a card name, and you reveal cards off the top of your deck until you find the card that you named. You put that named card in your hand, and each other card you revealed off of Spoils gets exiled, and you lose 1 life for each one. This is easily my least favorite card in the deck. I play it because it's, effectively copies 5 and 6 of Ad Nauseam or Angel's Grace, but that's a little sketchy. Really, I think of this card as an emergency button, or if you happen to know what the top card of your library is, an instant speed cantrip. So that comes up against like Goblin Guides or Lantern or something. Or if you scry it to the top and you can afford to just throw the spell out there. You can kill yourself with it. Obviously, it's like if you cast it, you name Ad Nauseam, and these 2 cards are revealed before you reveal Ad Nauseam, you lose the game because you can't actually kill your opponent. So that's something to watch out for. But I believe Frank Carson did an article on China Fireball a while ago, and he talked about the odds of actually losing the game based on casting a Spoils of the Vault by exiling too many Seeming Spirit Guides or exiling both of your win cons, and it was like 6%. So it's not that high, but it does happen. So if it part of playing the deck is just accepting that sometimes when you cast Spoils of the Vault, you're gonna die to it. So I often don't like casting this card unless I either have to, like I'm dead on board next turn, or I know what the top card is, so I can just use it as a cantrip. Because of my hatred for Spoils of the Vault, a lot of lists play 3. I personally play 2, as you can see, and I cut 1 for Mystical Teachings. So this card actually has a whole bunch of uses in the deck. So obviously, it can tutor for Angel's Grace and Ad Nauseam, or Pact of Negation. If you're in a tight spot and you have to kill something, you can tutor for a Lightning Storm and just try to kill the creature that way, and win through Lab Man later. You can also get Echoing Truth with it, and in the post board, it doesn't only get instant cards. It also gets any card with flash. So in your sideboard, if you happen to side in this spicy little number, you can tutor for it. I haven't done it yet, but I know it's there, and I really, really want to do it to somebody. Yeah, so this card's really sweet. It's very good against control decks, and it's good against like hand disruption, kind of like grindy decks. I love this card way more than I do Spoils. Pact of Negation is pretty straightforward. It counters things you don't want to resolve. So it protects your combo. It counters like, I don't know, like a turn 3 Karn from Tron if you're on the draw and you can kill them next turn. There's a whole bunch of tricks you can do with this card. One of the most popular ones is what I like to call the Build Your Own Force of Will. So you Pact of Negation, some spell, and on the upkeep, in response to the Pact trigger, you can Angel's Grace, and because Angel's Grace says you can't lose the game this turn, you just paid 1 mana and 2 cards effectively to counter, some important spell that your opponent tried to cast. So it kind of works like Force of Will does in Legacy. So that's pretty cool. Another one is you can actually go off in response to this Pact Negation trigger. One of the cool things, like at the end of your turn 3, and you have a loaded, like if you suspended the Lotus Bloom on turn 1, at the end of your turn 3, it'll have 1 time counter left on it. And if you have an Angel's Grace in your hand, or if you have an Unlife in play, and you have the combo, right? What you can do is Pact of Negation one of your opponent's spells on their turn, and on your turn, stack the triggers so that Lotus Bloom will resolve before Pact of Negation, Pact of Negation's trigger resolves, right? And then once your Lotus Bloom is in play, you can use it for mana and just kill them in response to the Pact trigger. I've done that a whole bunch of times. Just like this card is so good in this deck, and a lot of people, I guess like a lot of people who play against this deck don't realize just how great this card is. I kind of didn't want to cut a third one for the Echoing Truth, but humans is disgusting, so we gotta have a way to deal with Meddling Mage in the main board at least. And finally, for the main board, we have the two win cons. Lightning Storm is, I don't want to say straightforward, but basically it just deals a bunch of damage to a thing, right? If you're playing this deck, you have to hold priority when you cast it, because if you don't and your opponent says fine, like acknowledges that it happened, it'll only deal 3 damage. So what you have to do is you have to cast it, hold priority, discard a number of lands, just so that it will kill your opponent. That's another common mistake that I've seen like newer Ad Nauseam players make, is they'll cast Lightning Storm, hold priority, they'll get that part right, but then they'll discard all of their lands to their opponent. And if you read the card carefully, you can see that any player can activate this ability. So if you discard all of your lands, and your opponent has a land in their hand, and they discard it back to you, you will get hit with your Lightning Storm. Or something that's not them will get hit with their Lightning Storm, and you won't kill them. So only discard a number of lands so that it's just lethal for your opponent. If they're at 20, that number is 9. Because 9, each land is basically a shock, and Lightning Storm itself is a lightning bolt. So if you do the math, 9 lands times 9 times 2 is 18, plus an additional 3 is 21 damage. So if that 20, just remember that 9 lands kills them. Otherwise, just take your time with this card. Make sure you count. I used to just count by 2s and then add an additional 3, do it slowly, but when you play the deck long enough, you kind of remember the numbers as shortcuts. And for the times when you can't kill your opponent with Lightning Storm, like if they're at infinite life or whatever, Laboratory Maniac comes in. So, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You play Labman. Well, okay. It's important to note that you need to be able to play a land drop the turn you try to kill your opponent with Labman, because you need that mana and 1 Seeming Spirit Guide, right? You have to make a red mana with Seeming Spirit Guide, make a non-red mana with one of your lands. So like if you play City Brass named green or something, like it doesn't matter as long as it's not red. Then you play a Pentad Prism for 2. After the Pentad Prism resolves, you exile 2 more Seeming Spirit Guides and use one of the Prism counters for a blue, and you cast your Laboratory Maniac. Then you use the last Prism counter to cast a Serum Visions. You have to, like, I guess if you have a ton of mana in play, you don't have to play a land drop, but typically on turn 4, if for whatever reason you can't kill them with Lightning Storm, you need to be able to play a land that turn, which you can if you draw Ad Nauseam, you have all your cards in your deck, so you can just play a City Brass or a Basic or a Gemstone Mine or whatever. Another sweet kill with Laboratory Maniac involves Angel's Grace and Spoils of the Vault. So you don't actually need Ad Nauseam to kill your opponent. It's very useful, and it'll be like 90% of the games, okay, higher than 90, like 98% of the games, you will cast Ad Nauseam and your opponent will die. But for that like 2%, you can use this trick. So you need a Laboratory Maniac in play already, and on your upkeep, you can cast Angel's Grace, and still on your upkeep, after Angel's Grace is resolved, you cast Spoils of the Vault. And if it resolves, you name a card that's not in your library. So like Emrakul the Aeon's Torn or something. Like literally any card that's not here, right? And what'll happen is Spoils of the Vault will exile your entire library. Then you move to your draw step, and if your opponent doesn't kill the Laboratory Maniac or remove it from the board, you win. Like, it's that simple. You can also just do this main phase. If you have a Serum Visions in your hand, you can just go Labman, Angel's Grace, spoils a card that's not in my deck, Serum, your opponent's dead. So that's pretty much it for the main board. Let's move on to the sideboard real fast. Okay, so we have another Pact negation for other combo decks and other control decks. Really, just when you need to be able to fight over your combo, really. Slaughter Pact removes problematic creatures like Meddling Mage I've named, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Gadok Teague, Eidolon of the Great Revel, stuff like that. Thalia. It's just a, all around good removal spell. Thoughtseize comes in against control decks, other combo decks, Tron sometimes. Like, you don't really need a sideboard for Tron, but, it's probably better than one of the cards in your deck, so you can just Thoughtseize like their card out of their hand or something. I also personally like to bring it against decks that play Abrupt Decay, because if for some reason your Lightning Storm, if you can't kill them with Lightning Storm for whatever reason, and you try to kill them with Laboratory Maniac, and they're holding up Abrupt Decay, you're not going to win that, because they're just going to Abrupt Decay your Laboratory Maniac in response to your Serum Visions, and you're going to die. So what I like to in those matchups, I like to think of Thoughtseize as like a proactive counterspell, if that makes sense. So you Thoughtseize the Abrupt Decay out of their hand, and then you play your Laboratory Maniac. You try to kill them that way. So you're just gonna have to note that you need an extra mana if you're gonna do that. But yeah, Thoughtseize does what Thoughtseize does, right? I'm trying out the sideboard from this Facebook group that I'm a part of, and the guy was talking about playing Swan Song, which I've been trying out, and I've actually been liking it. So this is really for decks that try to play Blood Moon on like turn 3, where you want to be able to counter it, but you don't want to like have to deal with the Pact trigger on your upkeep, because typically Pact was the only counterspell that we played. So sorry, my mouse settings are like getting like super bugged out. Okay, yeah, but so Swan Song is good for countering, like Stony Silences or Blood Moons or other annoying things that you don't want to have to use a Pact on. Path to Exile is another removal spell, kind of for the same stuff that Slaughter Pact deals with. I play it over Fatal Push because a lot of the times I found that you can't really trigger Revolt in this deck often. There's only two ways. Cracking a Lotus Bloom and using the last counter on a Gemstone Mine are like the only two ways you can trigger Revolt. So I got really tired of like not being able to call Eidolon of Rhetorics or Thought Not Seers or something when I really needed to. So I'm just gonna use. I switched to Path to Exile. It's a catch-all. Like, you can give your opponent the extra land. It typically doesn't matter. So whatever. Collective Brutality is kind of in the same vein as Thoughtseize, but it also gains life, which is note. So against Burn, which is already a good matchup for us, you can bring in this and use all three modes, like kill their dude, take a Burn spell out of their hand, and gain some life. Like, this card just destroys them. It's also good against other combo decks and control decks, etc. This card is the one I'm most excited about, and it's been pulling a ton of work. So Ad Nauseam doesn't play creatures in the. You play like 5 creatures in the main, one of which you cast. Like, I've cast Laboratory Maniac way more games than I've cast Demon Spirit Guide. It does come up, but it's not very often. So typically what will happen is your opponent will slide out a lot of the removal spells. They might leave in like one to try to get the lab in if you try to kill them with that, like whatever. But Vendilion Clique is great because it disrupts them. So against other combo decks, you can take away one of the pieces. Against control decks, you can take away a counter spell, or like random removal spells or whatever. Like against Tron, it's great. Like you play it, you take their card, and you have a clock. And it has evasion, and it's a clock, and they don't have like any, they don't have any removal spells because they sided them all out. So a lot of people have been caught off guard by this card. I think maybe if Ad Nauseam players start playing this card more, people will catch on. But right now, it's been fantastic. Like, I've taken a counterflux with it. Like, there was no way I was beating that card. I took a counterflux with it, and I just started pressuring him. And when he went to deal with the V-Click, I just killed him in response with the combo. Like, you're attacking them from 2 different angles, one of which they're not ready for. It's so good. So moving on. Painful Truths basically draws you cards. That's what it's here for. It's your best friend against like discard decks like Jund or Mardu Pyromancer or Death Shadow, whatever. Easy, straightforward. Then we have two board wipes. Two different ones, and I'll explain that in a second. But we have Bantu's Last Reckoning and Supreme Verdict. Um, each of them are better, you know, in different matchups. Like Supreme Verdict is much better in the Merfolk matchup than Bantu's is because Bantu's can get countered, Supreme Verdict cannot. Um, it's really just go wide decks, things you need board wipes for. The reason you play two, and I found this out the hard way, is because of that Meddling Mage card again. So what happened to me was I was playing two Bantu's Last Reckoning because it costs 3 mana. It's really good against humans, whatever. My opponent viled in a Meddling Mage and named Bantu's, and like I had no way to deal with it anymore. Like his board was uncontrollable. I couldn't do anything about it. So I'm playing a one of each just to kind of hedge against Meddling Mage because humans is so popular right now, and it's one of the ways we can fight them really. And Leyline of Sanctity is the last sideboard card. It's pretty straightforward. Comes in against decks that want to tear your hand apart, or against other combo decks like Storm. Notably, Gifts Ungiven has to target an opponent. So if you have a Leyline to play, they can't cast Gifts. If they try to, tell them they can't. Make them read their own card, right? I actually lost that game because I did not realize what Gifts Ungiven did, and I had a Leyline to play, and he snuck it under me. But, whatever. Stuff happens. It's great against burn as well. So, yeah, that's really all I got for the deck. I know it was kind of long because I like to I like to go into detail. I've played the deck for a very long time. It's been almost, I say very long, but it's been almost like 2 years. Um, and I'm really passionate about it. I've put in a lot of hours and a lot of matches. So hopefully you guys enjoy the league, and let's get to some games.